Hi, my name's Kelly, and I wanted to go over how our materials exploration went. So, the process that I used for it was very open-ended. I sent a letter home to families asking for different design materials for structures. We got lots of stuff. The main things we used were craft sticks, boxes, cardboard, toothpicks, spaghetti noodles, marshmallows, gumdrops, pipe cleaners, duct tape, glue, Play-Doh. I don't remember if I mentioned that one. So anyways, we got all those materials. They were compiled, and then I told students that we were going to be exploring different materials that would be effective to design a structure. And I just told them that the goal was to design a house or a structure. And I left it very open-ended, and they were able to pick out whatever materials they felt they needed. They were in pairs, and then they could start building. And we spent probably 40 minutes building. And there wasn't too many restrictions on materials, just a few. There weren't the boxes weren't the same, and so students who chose boxes or cardboard had different boxes and different pieces. And then also the Play-Doh was limited, so that one was another one that was limited. But everything else, they were able to choose what they felt they needed and then begin their design. And so throughout this video, I'll share some pictures of what they ended up creating, and then I will show the poster we created during a reflection, and there are some pretty cool insights on that. And then at the end, I'll go over the reflection questions and what we learned from this experience and what I learned from this experience. This is an anchor chart that we created after our designs. We came together in a circle and talked about materials that we felt were good for structures and then ones that we thought were challenging. And so you'll see in the pink, those were the ones that we felt that were good, and then the blue was ones we felt were challenging, and we also compared and contrasted. And so a couple things to highlight. The first one that students thought was good was Play-Doh because it was smushy and sticky, and they could shape or mold it into different things, and a lot of them talked about using the Play-Doh as a base. And then another group mentioned, though, that Play-Doh breaks and dries up after a while, and so that if you were trying to create a structure that lasted, that they felt that it actually was a challenge to use. And then we had the same talk about duct tape. So we felt that duct tape was really great because it held things tightly, but it also was difficult to use because it was so sticky, especially for students. They had trouble cutting it and then using it effectively. So we also talked about small pieces were easier to manage it sometimes. Cardboard they felt was a plus because it was strong, there was different sizes, and for this activity they also could choose boxes that hadn't been broken down. So they didn't necessarily have to build up in all cases. One student mentioned that fabric was really great because it was lightweight and didn't add a lot of pressure to their structure. Some groups liked popsicle sticks, saying that they stuck in the Play-Doh and the tape held it really well, but other groups said that they were uneven. They tried breaking their popsicle sticks and they found that that was hard and that there was easily gaps in between their structures, so there were parts that weren't as stable. Elmer's glue was also talked about because it took a really long time to dry and was messy, but it did work on flat surfaces, so some groups said they did like that. And the spaghetti noodles and the marshmallows, students definitely picked up on when building a structure that those were not the best materials. We also talked about constraints, so you'll notice we just briefly talked about them because there wasn't many, but we did talk about how we had a little bit of material constraint. There were some limited and some that broke, so when they got it, their materials might have broke, so they had to figure out what else to use. We talked about cost being an issue and how families donated these materials, and so what would we do if we didn't have them, or what if we had to incorporate costs into our planning, and time. because a lot of groups noticed they needed more time than was needed in order to create. And so how to manage our time wisely, and what do we do if we're limited there. And then we talked about testing and how we test our structures or how we test our projects, and that we can choose how we test them, but there are also universal tests. So we talked about if someone was building a bridge, would we want the designers of the bridge to test it themselves, or would we want there to be a set of laws or tests that had to be mandated or followed in order to test? And so they all were like, oh, well, if there's a bridge, there needs to be a universal test. However, for some projects, we might choose how we are doing it. For example, someone brought up if they were designing something for the first time that hadn't been created, there might not be a universal test for it yet. And then the last piece was the question, were you successful and why? And we all went around and justified why we felt we were successful. And a few students were at a phase where they could also talk about how they were successful, but also what challenges or ways they may not have been successful and why. So I wanted to go over some of the reflection questions that were provided to us for this materials exploration project. And the first question was, what went well? Two things that went well in my classroom when I was doing the exploration was that students were engaged and they were using specific vocabulary. So some of the words I heard were reinforce, stable, strong, structure, base. And then the next question was, what surprised you about what your students did and did not know? A couple things that surprised me is that they were really worried about other aspects in their presentation, like the design. So not necessarily about whether they could build a structure, but what it would look like, how they would present it to the class. And compromising was really hard. So even though they were just working in pairs, if one person had an idea and another one had a different idea, they weren't really sure how to compromise. I had a couple groups who actually built like two separate designs. And then they were really worried about how it was fair with materials. So I didn't give much direction. It was very open-ended as far as what materials they could use. And so if a material was taken or it was used by another group, they were concerned about their own project and how come they didn't get it for theirs. Some things, it says, how did this help you think about how you want to present materials in their next building activity? And I thought about having students select materials thoughtfully, so creating some type of procedure to how they're going to use the materials, why they selected them, and then also possibly putting some type of limit on the materials. I noticed that when they had free reign, it was like they just wanted them because they wanted them. There wasn't necessarily a purpose. So possibly telling them they might get a limited amount so that they're really thoughtful about what they're choosing. And the last question is, what else did you learn from the experience, and how will you alter how you do things for your next activity? So one other thing I learned was that time, they needed more time than I was planning on giving them. So time's really important. And the reflection piece, I felt like a lot of the learning that took place happened after when we were reflecting. And so trying to build in reflection throughout the next building activity, before, during, and after, for them to change their design or to really thoughtfully think about it, and then also at the end to grow from it.